Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show tonight. I'm Mike Griffith. Welcome to Ingles on the Beat. It's finally game week, and so I thought we would bring a really special guest, somebody who's been around a few Georgia football games, a little bit of SEC action, Mr. Mark Bradley, columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. I need some perspective here, Mark. Like I said, you've been at this game a long time, and this was an off season like no other. Certainly, we hope we never have to go through anything like this again. But just if you could, kind of give me your thoughts on what we went through. I know usually you put this in 24 inches in a column in the AJC, but now let's talk, let's freeform, and just kind of give me some reflection on what we've just gone through in this off season.
Well, you know, if 6 months ago somebody had said the last game I would have gone to would have been the first game of the SEC basketball tournament, I would have said, well, I guess I'd be about 5 months into retirement now. But but you know, it's like it's hard to describe the difference between having a normal sports year and having a sports year where you had nothing for so long, and now you seem to have almost everything. You know, on Saturday, you could have watched the Stanley Cup finals, college football, baseball, the U.S. Open, and the NBA conference finals. You know, and that somehow or another that you're thinking, oh yeah, let's see what's on the other channel, and there's like something on every channel. And for the longest time, about all there was to watch was the reruns of the Chicago Bulls from 1996. It's just, you know, I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know, but there's never been anything quite like this. And you know, there was no game planning this, and there really wasn't anything to do but just try to get through it, and that's what we're still trying to do.
You know, we're obviously the best Monday morning quarterbacks, us sports writers, but you know, looking back, Mark, and I don't know if we have enough perspective on COVID and treatments and the disease itself yet. You know, the numbers have kind of been somewhat scattershot. There's been some inconsistency in reporting and data. I think we all agree it's very dangerous, and we need to continue to, you know, to follow protocol and try to avoid this horrible plague. But in hindsight, 2020, what should sports have done different?
I don't know that they could have done anything differently, because if you remember back in March, when it looked like the NCAA tournament and the conference tournaments were going to go on as scheduled, and then all of a sudden everything over the span of 24 hours, a Wednesday into Thursday, everything stopped. And everything stopped until, I don't know, who was the first one to come back? Basketball in the bubble? I think basketball in the bubble, maybe. But you know, nobody knew then. Everybody kind of realized that something had to be done to arrest the spread at the rate it was going. But you know, nobody in the United States, at least not in the past 100 years, had faced anything like this. And I think everybody was just trying to avert a tragedy, which I think we probably ended up doing. But it was like, you know, okay, now is it safe to go back a month later? Is it safe to go back 3 months later? Is it safe to go to school now? Is it, or is it not? And like you said, there's still so many questions that don't have good answers. And you know, really, I don't know that we'll have an answer until we have a vaccine.
Right. You know, and it is. It's very much a measured risk. It's very much risk reward. Is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, different age groups have different.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. You and I both are quite aware of that. Do you believe, Mark, that we're going to get through this football season without a stoppage?
You know, I confess that in the latter part of July, I didn't think we were going to get to the start of the football season, but here it is. It's clearly going to start. It has started in a lot of places in the SEC. I can't imagine it shutting down before Saturday now. I think it's a question of how much risk we're willing to tolerate, and where the numbers go. Because if there had been another spike, let's say in the past couple of weeks, the way there was in the early part of July, we might not be having the SEC starting here today. But I think we've learned a little bit about how it spreads and how you can protect yourself. And, the hope is that we'll be able to get through the fall without anything spiking again. And if that happens, then, the NBA has certainly done it. I mean, but of course, the NBA had to bubble up almost its entire league for that to happen. But you have to give baseball some credit too. I mean, it looked like when the first week ended and the Marlins had 19 guys testing positive, you wondered if they were going to get through 2 weeks. But now they're a week away from their postseason too. So I think we're seeing that if you do have reliable and repeated tests, you can manage to keep it maybe under some kind of control. Now, whether or not that's going to work in a sport that is as high contact as football, I don't know. But the NFL has gotten through 2 weeks so far, and the ACC started a couple of weeks ago. So, of course, everybody has also been worried about what's going to happen when the weather gets colder, and the weather is getting colder.
Right. Yeah. Flu. And earlier today, Kirby Smart telling us that, these guys are going to have 3 tests a week, including one on game day or one before they get on the plane.
Right.
So really, going to great measures and cautions to try and do the testing. I think we've all said the testing is the key, and we hope certainly that science and medicine can make these advances, because if we can get the accurate testing, theoretically that should slow the plague, certainly among the student athletes. Now, the crowds are a whole different mess, a whole different situation. I reserve thought on that. 25,000 socially distanced or not.
It doesn't. 25,000 doesn't seem like a lot when you're used to like 90,000.
Right.
But still, 25,000 is a lot of people. So.
In one spot. Earlier, Mark, this week the SEC came out with some game cancellation guidelines. They said, "Hey, look, you got to have 53 scholarship players available, 7 offensive linemen, 1 quarterback, and 4 defensive linemen." And it's like, yeah, okay. And it was almost like that was in response to these numbers for cancellation, and right. some pretty scary numbers at that. But here we are. We're where we are with COVID. We're getting ready for an exciting SEC weekend. People have been holding their breath. I know. The last 2 weeks I feel kind of guilty. I haven't watched much football. It's not the SEC, and it just doesn't hold the interest. So I guess I would ask you, looking at Kirby Smart. It's year 5. So what do we title this season for Kirby Smart in year 5?
I don't.
Is there a window here?
I think this has already been such an odd year for everybody that it's hard to look at it as just another in a series here. I think you have to kind of look at this as maybe a one-off for everybody. Now, it could be that the one-off, this is the one-off year. The one-off year is the one where we see Kirby Smart win the national championship. I mean, somebody's probably going to win it. But, I think that given the offseason that they were already going to be without their starting quarterback of the last 3 years, and then that the starting quarterback that they presumably were going to have, Jamie Newman, ended up opting out of the season, that's a lot to have to deal with in a pretty short amount of time. But it is, not to sound like Bill Belichick, but it is what it is. Everybody has got hurdles that they didn't think that would ever exist that they have to get over this year, and Georgia's no different.
Obviously, Georgia had a national championship go over their outstretched arms in 2017 in overtime. 2018, debatable whether or not Georgia was a playoff team or one of the four best. Last season, a top 5 season, even though there was a lot of turnover at receiver and injuries on the offensive line. Mark, do you think that Kirby Smart has done – adequate is not a good word, but has he lived up to what he should be as a Georgia coach the first 4 years? Should Georgia fans look back at these first 4 years under Kirby Smart and go, yeah, we've done all right for ourselves. We're in a good shape and we're in a good direction.
I think that's exactly how they should look at it. You know, this is a program that for better or worse, and for one reason or another, never got to the national championship level from the time Herschel Walker left to the time Kirby Smart came. And you know, they were close under Mark Richt, but they never quite got there. You know, with Kirby Smart, year 2, they're in the national championship game and they're leading the national championship game for most of it. In fact, I think there's some crazy stat that of the 2 famous Alabama games, the one in the final and the one in the SEC championship, Alabama won both games without ever taking a snap while it was holding the lead. So, I mean, you know, Georgia has been right there. If it had beaten Alabama in the SEC championship game in 2018, you know, it might have won the national championship that year. So they've been close. I think they took a tiny bit of a step back last year. I don't think they were a national championship team last year, but you know, like you say, they were still number 5 in the country. So they're close. It's just a matter of you know, keeping knocking on the door, and the theory is that one of these days you'll get through it.
Yeah, you know, you look at the Georgia quarterback situation. You touched on this a little bit earlier. Georgia had Jamie Newman come in from Wake Forest, the graduate transfer, and then there was no spring, and suddenly the guy that came to learn a pro-style offense didn't have time to learn a pro-style offense, so they went out and got another guy that did know a pro-style offense, except that guy's got a bad knee, so he's not going to start against Arkansas. And we're going to see this kid that had brain surgery in May of 2019 with steel screws and a metal plate in his head. I mean, this is one of these scripts, Mark. I mean, you can have your column half written before the game even kicks off.
And in fact, you may have just written half of it for me. But yeah, I know it's weird. And now, of course, it is a little different, you know, that they did get a break in that they're going to a school that hasn't won an SEC game in 2 years. So, you know,
but who's being picky?
That's a pretty soft landing, I think.
Well, you know, Mark, they did win an SEC home game in 2016 against Florida, though. Yeah. So they, at least the last game they won at home was 2016. So that helps a little bit.
So I think, you know, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about Georgia, at least from the quarterback position. But I also think there's an awful lot of talent there, unless all the recruiting ratings in the world are wrong. And this is what programs have to do. You know, Alabama lost Tua. How many? LSU lost Joe Burrow. Oklahoma has gone through Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield in consecutive years. So and then last year they had Jalen Hurts. So it's almost like, you know, it's not quite like college basketball where if you have a big name player, you know you're only going to have him for 1 year. In football, you can have him for 2 or 3, but still, you know, and especially with guys opting out of this year because of the virus, you know, the shelf life on college football has gotten shorter than it used to be. You know, I don't think anybody thinks in terms of 4-year increments anymore. They think of terms of 3 or even 2.
Yeah, specifically at the quarterback position, you know, you look at, you know, now Kirby talks about this accelerated recruiting calendar. This year, there's no recruiting calendar. None of these kids are getting to visit campus. It really, you know, that's tough and unfortunate that they didn't get an opportunity to scout that out. But, you know, it started where so many of these guys were early enrollees. And then you got a guy like JT Daniels now at Georgia, who actually left high school a full year early, didn't even play his senior year of eligibility in high school. So he could be at USC, only the second true freshman to start at quarterback for USC. I mean, this guy, I don't know that Georgia fans really know a lot about just who this guy, I mean, he was really the cat's meow out there. I mean, this was going to be the next greatest, latest. And then, you know, suddenly his coach and the offensive coordinator kind of got in a divorce mid-season out there his freshman year. Play calling changed. Georgia fans go, oh, yeah, we know how that works out with play calling. And suddenly, you know, they're a 500 team. He starts the second year, has a tremendous first half, throws for over 200 yards, completes about 75% of his passes. Second quarter, goes down with a knee and he disappears. And the next guy takes over, and the dad looks at it and says, you know, I'm just not sure if this is worth pursuing now that this other quarterback has done so well. So he comes to Georgia, and when his plane lands, Newman starts looking around. I mean, this is like the new thing for – I mean, this is – you know, Nick Saban said it was going to be free agency, Mark, and I don't know. I mean, is this good?
It's free agency.
And now we're talking about next year anybody can transfer anywhere once.
Yeah. It's –
I mean, is this good? Is this good for college football? What do you think?
You know, I know the NCAA is trying to do things for the good of the players, but it has almost gotten to the point where you're essentially, you know, if you know that if there's a quarterback who's not starting this year, he's not going to be where in that spot again next year. He's going to get out of there. And you know, obviously it happened with Jacob Eason at Georgia. It happened with Justin Fields. It happens everywhere. It's just, you know, the quarterback position especially has become a waiver wire. And, you know, I think the last three quarterbacks to win the Heisman have been transfers: Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Burrow. You know, and before that there was Cam Newton and Johnny Manziel. So it's just, you know, you really. It's a different, you know, you hate to say it's a different world than when we were growing up, because that makes us sound really, really old, which we are. But you know, it is a different world. I mean, you know, back in the day, you thought, well, you know, here's a guy, he comes to school. Maybe he doesn't play as a freshman because freshmen were ineligible back then, but he plays sophomore, junior, senior. And you don't think that way anymore.
A lot of people say that you have to have an explosive offense to win a national championship. Now, I've heard a lot of Georgia fans say that. Georgia's obviously got a great defense. They bring back 8 of 11 starters on a team that led the nation in scoring defense, run defense, 3rd in total defense, and 8th in pass efficiency. Do you buy into that, Mark? Can Georgia win if their offense is just okay, if this defense is everything we think that it is?
You know, maybe. You know, I don't know that, you know, of course, the way the LSU scored last year, it was like, you know, if you didn't score 35 points, you had no chance of beating them. But I don't know that we're going to see anybody as good as LSU come along in this year anyway, because that was a remarkable team. But I do think the game has skewed toward offense. But I think football always, and all sports run in cycles, but a few years ago, you remember in the NFL where it was like nobody could stop anybody. And it kind of hit its peak a couple of years ago in that 54-51 Monday night game that the Rams and the Chiefs played. And it was like, you know, football at the next, you know, football on the 22nd century level or something. And yet the final score of the Super Bowl that year was Patriots 13, Rams 3. So, you know, things tend to even out a little bit. I do think the college game has gotten certainly very offensive heavy, but I think you still have to play a little defense too. And you know, LSU had just enough defense last year, and Clemson has had some of the best defenses in the country, and we know about Alabama. So I still think there has to be a foundation of that on any championship team.
Yeah, and this is going to have to be a Georgia team that's going to evolve offensively. So many guys, only 3 starters on offense, projected starters, have more than 7 starts in their career. So it's a very young defense, a brand new offensive coordinator, and in a quarterback situation where we could see 3 different starters by the end of the year. Certainly, Dwan Mathis looks like he's in line to start the first game. JT Daniels is the experienced guy to run the pro-style offense that Todd Monken was brought in to play. But hey, if JT's now healthy, you got to make do. And the only thing I'd wonder, Mark, about that defensive thought I had, because it was such a strange offseason, so disjointed, maybe the offenses don't have the sort of rhythm. I don't know that I've really picked that up early. It just looks like sloppy football to me, not quite as tight on special teams in those little areas that coaches always seem to get to last. But I just kind of think maybe Georgia, because of the way they're built with the depth, the level of buy-in, and as you said, the talent, if anybody benefits from this sort of offseason, it would seem to be a team that was very deep and talented and could sustain some losses and maybe even some COVID countouts. We haven't gotten far enough into the season to see if that's going to happen where, 10 or 13 guys are out for a team.
No, I think that's right. And I think that, this is a season where it may be a question almost as much of quantity as quality. Not that quality ever is not a big factor in any sport, but I think numbers are going to be huge this year just because of what you said. No spring football, a strange camp, a season put back till the end of September, 10 games instead of 12. And the issue of testing positive. So I think that, the deeper teams are you would have to think are in a better position than the non-deep teams. But that would probably be true most years, but especially so this year, I would imagine.
Talking with Atlanta Journal-Constitution columnist Mark Bradley about this upcoming season. We've touched a lot of the bases. We've talked a lot of Georgia. Is Georgia the favorite in your mind? I've seen a lot of people picking Alabama. I've seen some of the analysts picking Florida in the East. Where do you sit on the predictions and why?
I think it's probably those 3. I wasn't terribly sold on Alabama last year, even before they lost to LSU, because they haven't seemed as good defensively lately as maybe nobody's as good defensively as Alabama was in its heyday, but there was noticeable slippage over there, and now they're without Tua, and they're down to about only 2 great receivers as opposed to 5. Right. But I think Georgia has to go to Alabama. Florida and Georgia have to play in Jacksonville, which is going to be really weird. But I think those 3 are all right there together. I don't see LSU being anywhere near the team it was last year, given that the team it was last year, everybody's gone pretty much.
Yeah, 14 guys drafted, 16 guys, 16 starters
and
gone.
Joe Brady gone too. So
and Dave Aranda.
Yeah. So I think one of those 3 is going to be in the playoffs, and maybe 2 of those 3.
It'll be interesting to see if the SEC can get 2 teams in the playoffs this year, especially now that the Big Ten's kind of coming through the back door, Mark. Yeah. Only an 8-game schedule. I mean,
that's going to be tough to gauge. I mean, are 8 Big Ten games the equivalent of 10 SEC games? If Georgia goes 9-1, is that better than Michigan if it goes 8-0?
Right.
That's a tough one, but everything seems kind of tough right now when you think of all the hoops everybody has had to jump through to get to this point.
Yeah, no doubt it's been a year like no other. I guess I would just ask you your final thought. Arkansas plays against Georgia on Saturday in Fayetteville. Kickoff at 4:00. How do you see this game playing out, Mark?
Oh, I would think Georgia would probably win by 30 or so.
Yeah, I've got it 30-3.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, not the complete shutout. Maybe some reserve defensive back slips and the ball gets to the 38 and they kick a field goal and And Sam Pittman says, "Yes, sir." Something to build
picture,
on here.
Yeah, they take a picture of the scoreboard.
Well, you got to get some positive momentum going.
Yeah. But no, I would be shocked if the game were close.
Yeah. Mark, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Sorry we had some technical difficulties a little bit earlier. It's been a tough off season. A lot of people have had to kind of go the extra mile. My producer went the extra mile to put this together. But, Ingles went the extra mile this entire COVID period and continue to do so. Talk about being on the front line and delivering and making sure we get the groceries and the produce we need. I want to take a minute and recognize my sponsor, Ingles.
It's in our hearts to feel for real. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. But we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back. With open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Welcome back. Mike Griffith here on the Ingles on the Beat segment. If you're watching us, you can check us out live on YouTube. Many of you watching us on the Dog Nation Facebook page, another spot you can find us. I've tweeted out this link and tagged our two guests, Mark Bradley, and now Tom Murphy joins me. Tom, I tagged you too. At least I hope it was you. I hope it wasn't one of those imposter accounts that we see out there. Is that not one of the most frustrating things as a journalist? Because at first it's kind of funny until that person reports bad news and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't say that. That's the fake. Is that happened to you in Arkansas?
I don't think so, but I've had fake Twitter handles created in my name, and I was just trying to pass it along. I have a bunch of family in Atlanta, and you might wonder why I'm wearing black. This is in mourning for my Atlanta Falcons' failure to recover an onside kick yesterday. Still broken up about it.
They never run out of ways. The only consolation I can give people is somebody that grew up in Michigan is, you know what? If the Falcons are doing it, I guarantee you the Lions have already done it. They're the only pro. Even the Cleveland Browns found some level of respectability at times, right?
That's correct. And we found a way to beat the Lions on a last-second play just a couple of years ago when Golden Tate could not break the plane of the goal line, and it was an all-timer in terms of final finishes. So the Falcons came out on the right side of that one.
That's crazy. Good times. Well, Tom, we're getting ready to start another SEC season. Tonight's moment of trivia, when I worked at the Mobile Register and covered Alabama, I went and covered Tennessee, and Tom took over and dominated and pulled off something that I wasn't able to. I was driving back and forth to Tuscaloosa. I wasn't a very good salesman. Tom was able to actually move to Tuscaloosa. And Tom, you never did. How did you convince them? I put the numbers in front of them. I showed them how much money they could save. How did you finally get them to get the Alabama beat writer moved up there?
Well, just to be honest, I did that for 7 years. But Brett Scrotenboer, our Auburn beat writer, stayed in Auburn so many hotel nights, single guy, and racked up such a hotel bill that the Register next season in 2005 decided to move the beat writers to the towns.
They finally broke them. Well, hey, let's get talking about Sam Pittman in Arkansas. So many people in Georgia love Sam Pittman. Certainly the players love Sam Pittman. When he left the staff, Tom, I'm going to tell you, I walked out of that Mercedes-Benz Stadium after LSU beat Georgia. And then the next day when I got the news that Pittman was leaving, I just thought, wow, is this the beginning of the end for Georgia? They just got beat badly. And now you lose your glue guy, the one guy that brought everyone together, the most charismatic, arguably the best reporter. And now he just walked out the door and walked into Arkansas. Now Kirby's done a nice job replacing him with Matt Luke. It's pretty well documented. The Scott Cochran hire from Alabama, a guy you're familiar with, having covered the Tide. But tell us how our friend Sam Pittman is doing in Fayetteville, Arkansas. What have these first 7-8 months been like for Sam?
Well, they've been much like a lot of other coaches in college have gone through, which is COVID, and their recruiting is definitely on an uptick. He is an ace recruiter, no denying that. But you don't work a miracle overnight when a roster is as low as the Arkansas roster is right now. Clearly, like the least talented roster in the conference last year, couldn't settle on a quarterback. They're veterans on the offensive line. So the people who have the most excitement and hope for this coming year, you kind of put the pieces together and say, okay, there's a bunch of veterans on this offensive line. Sam and Brad Davis, the O-line coach, they're kind of offensive line whisperers. So the play there is going to be better. And they've gotten bigger there already. Felipe Franks at quarterback is going to be an upgrade over the shuffle they had last year with Ben Hicks and Nick Starkel. The young receiving core now is older, and you could match Trey Knox and Mike Woods and Traylon Burks up with a lot of SEC receiving cores. Not at the very top, but you could match them up pretty well. So you put all those together, offense should be better this year. They lost 3 key guys on defense from each level. Sosa Agim on the front, Scooter Harris at linebacker, Cam Curl at safety, all to the NFL. And so I do wonder if they're going to be able to, if Barry Odom is going to be able to push all the right buttons, mix and match, and use some smoke screens to slow people down. That's where I have a bigger concern. But they've got a year or two to go before I think you could say, hey, they have a chance against Auburn, or hey, they might spring an upset on LSU or A&M. And so this Georgia game, the odds makers, as you know, have made it a 24, 25-point spread, and that sounds about right.
Yeah, a lot of questions for Georgia too, Tom. I look at these Georgia Bulldogs, and likely Dwan Mathis making his first start under center. The experienced quarterback's knee isn't clear. I heard you say some things about the Arkansas offense. When we talk about their strengths, then do we start on the offensive line? How would you classify it if I just said, hey, strengths and weaknesses on offense? How would you tick that out?
Yeah, it's too early to call the O-line a strength in my view, because they weren't a great unit last year. Hey, the left tackle, Myron Cunningham, he might be among the best in the league. He's a good one. Ricky Stromberg, who was the right guard, he's now at center. They think he's going to be good. These guys are fighters, and that's what Sam Pittman looks for, is guys that are heavy, who will go out and be scrappy. And they've got a kid named Brady Latham who's scheduled to start at left guard, redshirt freshman, who is just scrappy. He's gotten in the most fights during camp. And so you got a veteran, senior at left tackle, and then the 3 guys on the interior are all from the same class. Stromberg played last year, so he's a sophomore. But then Brady Latham and Bo Limmer, the 2 guards, are redshirt freshmen. And so they're going up against these heavy 315 or whatever pound, 320 D tackles that Georgia has, and much of the rest of the SEC has. So hard to call them a strength. I would point to the receiving core that I referenced earlier, led by Woods, Burks, and Knox. I think they're going to be pretty salty. Don't know if they're completely on the same page with Felipe Franks yet. That's, to me, against this defense, what a great test for them to start out with. How many passes you can complete, how many guys you can get the ball to in space. Can they break any tackles? Can they do anything to confuse the Georgia secondary? All tough questions for these Razorbacks. And I would consider Franks a strength. Tight end, Hudson Henry's from the family legacy line of Henry's. Hunter was the Mackey Award winner in 2015. He hasn't developed to that level yet, but we think he's going to be pretty good. So strength on offense, I'd say quarterback Franks should be a strength, and then the receiving core. And I think the O-line is going to be better.
How about on defense? You mentioned losing Scooter. I got to ask you about the bumper pool guy. I mean, everybody loves the bumper. I know you're probably like, good grief, Mike. Can you get off the bumper pool? This is like last year's, like I'm catching on to the video or the song that everybody's already heard. Forgive me, but are the linebackers the strength on defense? What units would you say are the strengths for the Arkansas Razorbacks on defense?
Well, Bumper's doing fine. He was a Jeopardy answer last year on the category of great college nicknames, something like that. And so Bumper Pool made that. But he's a veteran with 123 tackles, had to start early as a true freshman 2 years ago. They put out their depth chart today, and it was a 4-2-5 alignment. So he's the weak side backer. Grant Morgan, a guy who's got 100 tackles in his career, he's the middle linebacker. And they might play as many as 6. I think they're going to be better, but great linebacking cores are the ones who sniff out plays and hit a guy in the hole, and it's a 1-yard gain. Or they run out to the edge and on a toss play, and make the tackle behind the line of scrimmage. And that hasn't happened a lot with Arkansas linebackers in recent years. And maybe they'll be able to diagnose and run better this year, but right now I call them okay. And I think they have depth there. Where we've been a little surprised, we thought their D-line, which almost lost everybody, the only returning starter is Mateo Soli, a Georgia kid whose father played for the Razorbacks, junior. He was the only returning starter. He played with a broken bone in his hand from the season opener till the end last year. And he's not on the starting lineup right now. They've got Dorian Gerald, a kid from South Carolina who's back, who suffered a bruised artery in his neck in the opener and was out for the year. He was on blood thinners, so he couldn't play. He's back at one end. They got a kid named Julius Coates, who has pretty much been the hype of this camp at the other end. So those two guys are your ends. And they like Jonathan Marshall, the guy who's been the strongest player on the team for several years at tackle. And Xavier Kelly, the Clemson transfer, and Isaiah Nichols are probably going to split time at the other tackle. They think the front can end up being a plus for them. The secondary, they like the numbers they have at safety, but so many of those guys are young. 3 starters were back in Busta Brown. He's a cornerback, and Jarquez McClellion, but he's a backup right now. So we're just going to have to see how this thing all sorts out, because I think they're doing some different things with coverages and rotations and personnel we haven't seen. And so if Arkansas is going to be good, what Barry Odom has put together, the structure and how these guys operate, will have to be better than what they were last year.
Are the special teams solid? Good punter, good kicker?
We like their return guys. Traylon Burks, the kid I'd mentioned, has got 10 1/4-inch hands. He caught punts last year in this manner with his hands up. And he did really well with it. Had a couple he nearly broke. But Scott Fountain from Georgia has got him catching in the traditional manner. And we think Burks is going to be okay. Devion Warren, a kick returner, pretty good. They lost their all-time accuracy leader in field goals. His name was Connor Limpert, just under 80% career. And so it's been a competition, but AJ Reed, the transfer from Duke, is in the starting position at kicker. And the punter is George Carrington is his name, and he transferred from Michigan. So Scott Fountain basically got out and worked the waiver wire, so to speak, during the offseason and brought in a couple of guys who were starters. Their punting could not have gotten much worse. The last 2 years, it's been really bad. Their net punting has been really low. One of many issues this team has had. So I expect punting will be better. Maybe field goals and all will be around the same. And I think they're going to get better on touchback percentage because they have not been a good touchback percentage team.
We're talking with Tom Murphy, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Tom, before I let you go, I guess we all want to see Sam Pittman do well. Obviously, it's going to be hard against Georgia. Georgia's pretty loaded. But big picture, long term, what does Sam need to do to turn it around? Because I contend that since A&M came in the league, I think that was a real dagger for Arkansas recruiting. I think it really hurt that program. And I think it's made Arkansas maybe the toughest job in the league. You look at the Mississippi schools, they've got a lot of in-state talent, and the junior colleges. Yeah, there's Vanderbilt, but they're right there in Nashville, somewhat centrally located. What does Sam have to do to overcome some of these built-in hurdles, obstacles that the Hogs face these days?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a tough solution. I agree with you that when A&M joined the SEC, it was a bad deal for Arkansas. It carved away some of their recruiting niche in Texas. And they haven't beaten A&M since the Aggies got in the league. They've had 3 overtime games and another one that they were in and probably should have won, but they've lost them all. You've got to recruit your way out of it. So I think having a mobile quarterback, that's point one. You got to have one from the beginning. And they had not had one in several years. So Felipe Franks, fully healed from the ankle, should give them a mobile option at quarterback. Both of their newest quarterback signees are dual threat guys. So for a few years, they ought to be set up there. We think that if his reputation holds, that the O-line is going to be a continuous build and a plus for them, and he should be able to recruit it well. So then you have the structure in place to have a solid offense. If Kendall Browse's operation here works, you want to hold on to him for a few years and just kind of keep the coaching staff together. And now defensively, if they start showing improvements, I would think Barry Odom would be a name who would be on a head coaching list again at some point in his career. Now he's taken on. Here's what I thought was really interesting, that everyone in the coaching industry understood how difficult a job Arkansas is right now. But Sam Pittman is such a relationship builder that guys like Barry Odom, Kendall Browse contacted Sam Pittman. So these guys wanted to work for a guy who had a reputation in the industry as being an even-handed guy, fun to be around, would be a good recruiter. And so it's a tough task, but the recruiting's got to be in place, and then you've got to get big guys. And so they've got to get better defensive tackles and more of them and be bigger on the offensive line. Sam understands that. He's been in the league for several years now, and he saw what Georgia had and how Georgia accelerated so quickly under Kirby Smart with that kind of structure. And he understands the structure. If he can recruit it to Arkansas is the big key.
That is the big deal. And Tom, you've covered the Hogs for a long time. I can't tell you how much it means that you join me here tonight. I think it's going to be a fun and interesting season for you. Obviously, Georgia, a tough game, but week 2 at Mississippi State, I think it could be winnable. I guess we'll see what happens with Mike Leach down there at LSU. I don't know how much experience you have with him or Mississippi State. I don't know what to expect. Do you have a thought being over there in the West about Mississippi State and LSU?
Well, this will be a good tester year for Ed Orgeron, who really cashed in. And that team last year, Mike, you saw live, just a phenomenal roster. I don't know if we'll ever see an offense like that in the country again. Joe Burrow had 60 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions, 10-to-1 ratio. But kind of building over there. But there's always going to be talent at LSU. Mississippi State, I really don't know what to expect, how much buy-in the guys have for Mike Leach. He's kind of thought of as a little, I don't know if flaky's the right word, but kind of the Pirates and all that. I like Mike Leach. Met him at the Cotton Bowl years ago when Texas Tech played Bama. But I think his teams have a stronger backbone than he might get credit for, that they're tougher on defense than they get credit for, and they're more gritty than people think of when they think of Mike Leach. So they're going to be solid. You know, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, solid. My picks came out in Sunday's paper. I gave Arkansas 3 wins, and there's an upset in there. Well, actually, they're probably going to be an underdog in every game, but I have them winning against Ole Miss at home and Tennessee at home, which probably would be a big upset, and then Missouri in the season finale. And that might be a little bit rosy, but it's the only 3 wins I could come up with.
Right. That sounds good to me. Tom, thanks so much for joining me. And sorry about your Atlanta Falcons. Maybe they can get it turned around next week. Maybe, like I said, at least you're going to be working with Sam Pittman. I know there's a lot of excited fans in Arkansas. I've done a few radio shows, and sounds like people are ready to start calling the pigs and getting excited again. And Sam is just such a jovial guy. I can certainly tell you that the Georgia fans hated to lose him. So I think you're going to get to really enjoy Sam before the season's over with.
Yeah, I hope so. And the thing is, keeping a strong upper lip when you get kicked in the mouth a few times during the course of this season. I mean, that's what they're preaching to the players, but how are the coaches going to respond?
Right.
Because I think it turned Chad Morris into a different guy. I just think all the losing and maybe feeling like he was over his head with a young coaching staff, I think it impacted him. And I don't think the same will happen to Sam Pittman.
I think you're probably right. Good close for Tom Murphy. Tom, thanks for joining me. I'm going to look at some of the comments and questions here. If anybody's got any questions on Georgia football, I was there for the press conference. Yeah, we were all there on Zoom, right? Kirby Smart said a few things today that I really liked. I really liked when he talked about we're going to find out our identity in all 3 phases of the game: offense, defense, special teams. I liked that he talked about I thought he was forthcoming about the quarterback situation. Is JT Daniels cleared? Hopes he's cleared by Saturday. Kirby pretty much told you that Dwan Mathis is starting because if your quarterback still isn't cleared, You're not going to be working reps in hopes that he's cleared. You're going to work a game plan that a guy like Dwan and Carson Beck, as younger and experienced quarterbacks, can handle. To me, what does that mean? That means more read option. That means more Zamir White between the tackles. Maybe we won't see all the bells and whistles of the pass game. I still think you'll see some spread and some 4 wide and single back, no tight end, maybe some 11 personnel with a tight end, 1 back, and 3 receivers. But if I look at the receivers now from left to, I see Matt Landers on one side, Pickens out wide to the other, and I see Jermaine Burton and Kyrus Jackson in the slots, and Demetrius Robertson battling for snaps in there, and Justin Robinson, the freshman from Eagles Landing. I think he's going to get in the game. Just not sure what you're going to get out of tight ends early. John Fitzpatrick is back, but Trey McKitty out with the arthroscopic knee surgery, and don't know how Darnell Washington's coming along. Everybody said Kirby was on him pretty good. It's quite an adjustment to college football, so maybe Darnell Washington not an early factor. So that's going to be pretty interesting. But Kyrus Jackson said that we're going to see a Georgia offense that's going to attack and try to score, and I'm really curious to see if that's going to happen, because you got a great defense. And that Arkansas, you just heard from Tom Murphy of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Mark Bradley, the columnist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, kicked off the show. But if you're facing a team that probably is not going to get into double digits in scoring, or certainly not more than 10 or 13, do you really take chances on offense? And I'll be interested to see if they attack, or if they do what we've seen in the past when Georgia gets up by 3 touchdowns and start handing off to run clock in the fourth quarter. And listen, it's a 10-game season. I don't think you can fault him if Kirby tries to hand off and run clock so that his offense only runs 9 plays in the fourth quarter instead of throw 22. Because the difference between 22 and you don't get extra credit for winning by more points, right? Now, certainly the polls are going to look at it and you want to cover the 3 theoretical spread is 24 points. I've got a 30-3 final. I'm looking for some of your predictions in here. If you have any predictions on, you guys are pretty harsh tonight in these comments, by the way. Listen, the Monday night show, I want to bring guests on here that can bring a different perspective and different ideas. And I know it's not the same pace and the same show as Friday night when we're a little bit more unplugged on the front porch. But this show is the beginning of the game week. And what I'm trying to do as a beat guy, I'm kind of bringing you into my world. I'm trying to get plugged into the other team. I'm trying to consider all the perspectives that surround this game that I haven't already thought of, because right off the top, you say Georgia, Arkansas, and I think we all have a certain amount of thoughts just flood the front of our mind. But I like to get different perspectives from different people. And certainly Mark Bradley is, probably, if not the greatest columnist, in the Southeastern Conference, one of them, regardless of your taste. The man's an absolute wordsmith. And, I consider myself privileged to work with him. And Tom Murphy, you want to talk about a heck of a beat guy that's been around forever and knows the ropes. And, as I said, Tom followed me on the Alabama beat in the 1990s, and he's done a great job. I mean, you guys got the best of the best there on the front end, and maybe we didn't have all the bells and snappy whistles, but trust me, I'm going to go back and transcribe what those guys said, because those are 2 of the best in the business, and I really, really appreciated having them on tonight's show. And now I kind of want to give you the Tennessee fix. And so Kiera's the Tennessee fix, the Georgia fix. Kiera's real confident about this offense. I guess I'm stuck on Murphy telling me Arkansas is going to beat Tennessee. But Monty Rice was asked about the defense. And Monty said, well, we'll just have to wait till 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock tomorrow night. He said, I know y'all are putting this up there on Twitter, but, those guys at Arkansas don't care, and we don't care about last year. And I think that is the absolute best attitude that Georgia football could take. What happened last year on defense doesn't matter. And offensively, I like the confidence. I like the mindset. And I love the Dwan Mathis story. You don't know, when I went to Dwan's house and sat with him and his dad, it was snowy and cold in Romulus, Michigan. The plane landed and it's freezing. I did a detour from New Orleans. I was supposed to go from New Orleans to Santa Monica, California, Santa Clarita, where where the national championship game was when Trevor beat Tua. And I called the boss up and I said, hey, man, can I make a detour to Detroit and talk to this kid? And because Dwan Mathis, nobody knew much about him, right? He was a late ad. And, Terrence, and you guys know he's joined us so many times, the father, couldn't have been more welcoming. Had long, hours and hours and hours with the Mathis family, really got to know them. And then, of course, the brain surgery, it was just an unbelievable story that we documented at Dog Nation, and the work Ron Corson did, and Piedmont Regional Hospital, and the world-class service that Dwan got to get. I guess Kirby used the word cranium surgery. Kirby throwing out the medical term. Every now and then Kirby will throw out a word. You go, what did Kirby just say? I think he said cranial surgery, in addition to the brain surgery to remove the cyst. You're thinking this kid was on a hospital table with his life on the line, his skull cut open. You can see the scar, head shaved, skull cut open, ICU for 4 days, lost 10, 15 pounds. Unbelievable. And now he's back, and he's on the verge of starting. Every time I tell Terrence about it, he said, I get teary-eyed just thinking about it, and I've covered college football a long time, folks, and let me tell you, when Dwan Mathis comes out of that tunnel Saturday, I know the scoreboards are going to stay 0-0, but that's going to be one of the biggest wins I've ever seen in my career, and I hope that we all appreciate that moment. Whatever happens after that, it's football talk. But from the humanitarian side, after everything all of us have been through, knowing what Dwan's been through, that he stuck it out, just a wonderful story for Georgia football and for Dwan Mathis. And, I can't think of a better way to close tonight. I want to thank you for joining me, hitting the share button for your friends to see it. Certainly helps me and my sponsor out. Coming to you every Monday night on the Ingles on the Beat segment. If you got questions, put them in the comments. I'll go back through there. Follow me on Twitter. I'm a great Twitter follow, I promise, at Mike Griffith 32. Tomorrow night, Connor Riley. Of course, every day at 10, Brandon Adams with Dog Nation Daily. Tuesday night, Connor Riley. Wednesday night, Jeff Sentel. Thursday, Cover 4. And then we have Friday night, Mike. And then we got football. Everybody be safe and have a great week. Thanks again.